I've given several speeches recently to portray the lives of a couple of our Supreme Court justices. But are you aware of the different philosophies that are used by our justices? Are you aware of the harm that has been done based on the philosophy chosen? Are you aware of how divided our court is today? I hope to answer some of those questions this morning. Near the founding of our country, John Adams made the statement, "We are a government of laws, not people." In other words, our government is based on a physical document, the Constitution, to which the original 13 colonies attached themselves, and to which each state since then has agreed to govern by. If someone says something's unconstitutional, you would think it would mean that it doesn't fit with the Constitution. But I think we've all heard someone say that when what they really mean is, I don't agree with that, or I don't think that's the way it should be. In front of you, there's a ballot. If you could take a moment and fill that out. And if you're online, Daniel's going to be launching a poll. There's no trick question here, just simple questions regarding knowing that Scalia is a very conservative justice and knowing that Ginsburg is a liberal justice. Do you think you would agree with Scalia more than 50% of the time or less than 50% of the time? And remember, this is anonymous. I'm not going to check you. And the same question for Ginsburg. Do you think you would agree with her more than 50% of the time or less than 50% of the time? My last speech, I talked about Ginsburg, how her work has affected the way that we view gender equality today. In a previous speech, I mentioned her philosophy that the Constitution can evolve and change. If I were to have an old document and I quote from it, and I were to say, "Es importante siempre aprender cómo hablar mejor," and I'd ask for a first interpretation of it, and I hear, "How is it important to learn how to speak better?" And I ask for a second interpretation, and they say it means, now, if I believe that document can evolve, I'm fine with that second interpretation because I think it's a good application of it. But Toastmasters didn't even exist when that document was made. In this case, there's no harm done. Very, very simple. But think of the harm that has been done based on the philosophy chosen by the Supreme Court justices. Something that comes to mind is the Dred Scott decision. That's when the black man was declared to be property. He did not have, nor could ever have, the rights of an American. At the same time, they declared the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional. In other words, saying Congress had no right to govern slavery in the territories. But you can look at that Constitution day and night, you'll never find anything of the sort in the Constitution. But they thought they were giving a good answer for a current problem and didn't base it in the Constitution. So what are some of the different philosophies that are used by justices? A lot of different ways you could divide it up. I'm just going to do it this way. Got an originalist camp and a progressive camp. In the originalist camp, you've got constructionists. They say, I'm just going to look at the text of the Constitution and judge everything based on that. But of course, words change meaning over time, so it is somewhat limiting. And then there's those that say, I'm going to look at the original intent of the author. How many times have you and I misjudged the intent of somebody in our own lives, let alone a document that's a couple centuries old? Textualist is someone that says, I want to go based on the original meaning of the document, what it meant at that time. And the way I find that out is by reading other things like the Federalist Papers that explain what the founders were thinking of when the Constitution was created. Then you've got the progressive camp. In the progressive camp, it sounds really good because you're adjusting the Constitution to fit current circumstances. But I think we've got that same tendency that we have about saying something's unconstitutional, is for someone to say what they think it should be instead of base it truly interpreting the Constitution, which is the job of the justice. What should the justices do if the Constitution is silent on a subject? Should they not also be silent, neither affirming nor denying a right, but leaving it up to the states to decide? When you've got the Constitution, which it's like a contract between the states, this is what they've agreed to. Is it right for someone else to come in? How many of us would sign the document if we knew that contract could be changed by somebody else without our permission? According to Scalia, when a justice says there's a right where it's not found in the Constitution, that's where they're walking away from interpreting the law, and instead they're writing law. There is a right way and there's a wrong way, according to Scalia, to change the Constitution. The right way is using the amendment process. The wrong way is for a justice to put into law something that's not in the Constitution, because that's the job of Congress, for them to write the laws. It was refreshing to me to see that the court isn't as divided as we might think. For example, we talked about Scalia and Ginsburg. They agreed in their decisions about 70% of the time. And even in our current court, which leans conservative, about 60% of the time, the votes are either unanimous or with only one dissenting vote, even with those different philosophies being involved. With that information, if you were to take the poll again, I wonder, would you change one of your votes? Because I know, based on when I first looked at it, I would have. I'm going to end with a quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes, who said, "We are but yet far from our true ideals of human equality and fairness. In the meantime, let's realize there's more unites us than divides us, and strive together to make this a better world for all."